The Arizona Territory in 1872 was not a place for gentle souls, yet Elias Thorne was precisely that. His one-room homestead, a stubborn wedge of timber and hope carved into the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains, stood as a monument to quiet desperation. The land was parched, the soil stingy, and the silence was a physical presence, broken only by the sigh of the wind and the distant, lonely cry of a hawk. Elias was a man running not from the law, but from the noise of other men, from the memory of a war that had carved hollows in his heart as deep as the canyons that scarred the landscape. He was tall, but stooped from labor, with eyes the color of a winter sky and a shyness that bordered on the furtive. His days were a simple, brutal rhythm: tend the meager crops, draw water from the stubborn well, and mend the fences that kept the wilderness and its perils at a tentative bay. He was a man content, if not happy, in his isolation, a single steady candle flame in the immense dark chapel of the frontier. This fragile peace shattered on an afternoon when the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. A storm was brewing, not just a common desert downpour, but a malevolent tempest that rolled down from the mountains with a terrifying speed. The wind, once a companion, became a demon, screaming as it tore at the shingles of his roof. Rain fell not in drops but in solid, horizontal sheets, and the dry creek bed behind his property transformed in minutes into a roaring coffee-brown torrent. Elias watched from his window, a knot of fear tightening in his gut as the water began to creep towards his barn. He knew he had to move his livestock, his sole source of wealth and sustenance, to higher ground. It was a fool's errand in such fury, but a necessary one. He plunged into the chaos, the cold rain soaking him to the bone in an instant, the wind threatening to knock him off his feet. He managed to get his 2 milk cows and his old plough horse out, their eyes white with panic, leading them to a small rocky knoll. But as he turned back, a sickening crack echoed above the storm's roar. An ancient pine, its roots undermined by the raging water, was falling directly towards his chicken coop. He was sprinting, his boots sinking in the mud, when a figure emerged from the grey veil of the rain. It was a woman, moving with a fluid, unhurried grace that defied the chaos around her. She was Apache, her hair a long black cascade plastered to her back, her deerskin dress dark with water. She did not look at him, but at the falling tree. With a series of sharp, guttural cries and a wave of her arm, she directed a small band of panicked chickens that had escaped the coop, herding them towards the relative safety of the barn, with an almost supernatural understanding of their flighty nature. The tree crashed down, obliterating the coop, but the birds were safe. Elias stood frozen, stunned by her sudden appearance and her decisive action. She turned her gaze on him then, and he felt the breath catch in his throat. Her face was all sharp, intelligent planes, her eyes dark and fathomless, holding a depth of knowledge and a quiet power that made his own shy soul feel childish. She was, without question, the most formidable person he had ever seen. She gestured towards his cabin, and he, wordless, could only nod. Inside, the howl of the wind was muted. They stood in the dim light, water pooling on the dirt floor, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and wood smoke. He offered her a blanket, which she took without a word, her eyes never leaving his. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. Finally he stammered, "Thank you, for the chickens." She merely inclined her head. "I am called Liwanu," she said, her voice low and melodic, yet carrying an undeniable authority. "It means growling bear. I have watched you, Elias Thorne. You do not tear at the land. You try to listen to it. This is rare in your people." Elias could only stare, his mind reeling. She had been watching him. For how long, and why? The storm outside began to subside, its fury spent, leaving behind a world washed clean and dripping. As the silence grew, Liwanu stood, letting the blanket fall. She approached him, stopping so close he could feel the heat radiating from her. She looked him up and down, not with desire, but with a cool, appraising assessment, like a farmer evaluating a potential stud animal. Her dark eyes met his frightened blue ones, and she spoke the words that would cleave his life in two. "You are strong, you are healthy, you are alone. I want a child from you." The statement hung in the air, simple, direct, and utterly world-shattering. Elias felt the floor drop away. This was not a proposal. It was not a request. It was a declaration, as immutable and stark as the mountains themselves. The days that followed Liwanu's proposition were a whirlwind of silent turmoil for Elias. Her words, "I want a child from you," echoed in the stillness of his cabin, a relentless refrain that dismantled every preconception he held about the world, about women, about himself. It was a demand that bypassed all social convention, all romantic notions, reducing the profound act of creation to a stark biological transaction. He was terrified, of course. The stories told in town about the Apaches were lurid tales of savagery and cruelty. Yet the woman who had stood in his cabin was not a monster. She was a force of nature, as primal and undeniable as the storm that had brought her. She had returned the next day, not to his doorstep, but to the edge of the tree line, waiting. He had approached her with the caution one would afford a wild predator, his heart hammering against his ribs. He tried to reason, to question, why? Why me? Her answer was pragmatic, stripped of all sentiment. My band is gone, wiped out by the Mexican army and the sickness that followed. I am the last. The line of my mother, and her mother before her, ends with me. I will not let it. You are a good man. Not a great one, not a fierce one, but a good one. Your blood is clean, your body is strong. The child would be strong. It would survive. She spoke of survival with a capital S, a concept so fundamental to her existence that it dwarfed Elias's own concerns for propriety or emotional connection. He tried to protest, to speak of sin, of God's law. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Your God lives in a book. My gods live in this rock, in that stream, in the sun that gives life and the drought that takes it. They understand the need to continue. They will not fault this. A strange and tense courtship began. Liwanu did not seek to seduce him. She educated him. She showed him which plants could heal a fever, which roots were edible when the crops failed. She taught him to read the signs of the weather in the behavior of the animals and the shape of the clouds. She was a repository of ancient, hard-won knowledge, and in sharing it, she was not just proving her value, but investing in the future survival of the child she intended to bear. Elias, in his shy, clumsy way, began to see not just the formidable warrior, but the brilliant strategist, the last guardian of a dying world. His fear slowly transmuted into a profound, awed respect. The pact, when it was finally sealed, was not an act of passion, but one of solemn mutual consent. It was performed in the cool, dark silence of his cabin, a functional and strangely sacred union. Afterward, Liwanu did not stay the night. She simply dressed, placed a hand on her flat stomach as if already making a promise, and melted back into the twilight. She continued to visit, her presence becoming a part of the rhythm of his life. The seasons turned. Her belly swelled, a living testament to their agreement. Elias found his feelings deepening in ways he could never have anticipated. It was not the grand romance of storybooks. It was something older, more foundational. It was a partnership. Forged in the crucible of necessity, a bond of shared purpose. He began to love her, not for her beauty, though he saw it, but for her strength, her intelligence, her unbreakable will. The idyll could not last. A group of 3 bounty hunters, rough men with dead eyes and a reputation for collecting Apache scalps for the territorial bounty, regardless of age or gender, stumbled upon their homestead. They saw Liwanu, heavily pregnant, and saw only a payday. They confronted Elias in his yard, their leader a hulking brute with a broken nose, sneering. Harboring a savage farmer? That's a hanging offense. Step aside and we'll make it quick for her. In that moment, the shy farmer vanished. The man who had run from violence found a reason to stand his ground. He did not reach for the rifle leaning against the porch. He simply stood, his body a shield between the men and his cabin. "She is my wife," he said, his voice low but carrying a newfound steel. "You will leave." The leader laughed, a harsh, ugly sound, and went for his gun. He never cleared leather, An arrow, silent and deadly, sprouted from his throat, its fletching vibrating with the force of the impact. He crumpled, gurgling, into the dust. The other two men froze, their eyes darting towards the cabin's loft window from where the shot had come. Liwanu stood there, another arrow already knocked, her face a mask of cold, lethal calm. Elias, moving with a speed he didn't know he possessed, scooped up his rifle and leveled it at the remaining men. "You heard me," he growled. "Take your filth and get off my land." They fled, dragging their dead companion behind them. Elias turned to look at Liwanu. She lowered the bow, her gaze meeting his. No words were spoken. None were needed. The pact had been tested in blood, and it had held. Weeks later, she gave birth to a son, a boy with his father's fair hair and his mother's fierce dark eyes. As Elias held his son for the first time, looking at the woman who had irrevocably changed his life, he understood. This was not the story he had envisioned for himself. It was harder, wilder, and more beautiful. It was not a story of conquest, but of convergence. It was the true story of the West. If you were captivated by this tale of two worlds colliding to create a new, unbreakable bond, a story that goes beyond the gunfights to the very heart of survival and legacy, then subscribe to the channel. Tap the bell so you don't miss our next journey into the wild, untamed heart of history. We have many more stories to tell.